For more than half a century, Neil Diamond has carried through radios, stadiums, and hearts across the world. Songs like Sweet Caroline, Hello Again, and I Am, I Said weren't just hits, they were anthems for generations. Behind the sparkle of sequined jackets and roaring crowds stood a man whose music told stories of love, loneliness, and hope. But today, at 84, the legendary singer faces a battle that changed everything. The world that once echoed with applause grew silent, and Neil Diamond was forced to step away from the stage, not by choice, but by fate. His journey from a young Brooklyn songwriter to one of the most celebrated performers in history has been filled with triumphs and heartbreaks. Yet, nothing could prepare his fans for the revelation that would come later in his life. A diagnosis that would alter his voice, his movement, and his entire world. Now, Neil Diamond is finally opening up about what truly happened. The struggles behind the curtain, the strength he found in silence, and the powerful message he wants to leave behind. This is the story of resilience, music, and the unbreakable spirit of a man who refuses to stop shining, even when the lights begin to fade. Long before the bright lights of the stage and the roar of thousands, Neil Diamond was just a boy from Brooklyn with a dream. Born in 1941 to a humble Jewish family, Neil Leslie Diamond grew up surrounded by music, not from fame, but from feeling. His mother loved classical melodies. His father sang folk songs, and in their small apartment, he found his first rhythm, the sound of hope. As a teenager, Neil discovered the guitar, and with it, a way to speak the words he couldn't say out loud. He wrote songs in his bedroom, often about love, heartbreak, and belonging, themes that would later define his entire career. Yet in those early years, success felt distant. He studied briefly at NYU on a fencing scholarship, but his heart was never on the piste. It was in the melody that played endlessly in his head. In the early 1960s, he began working as a songwriter in New York's famous Brill Building, surrounded by creative giants. He penned songs for others, learning the craft of turning raw emotion into timeless lyrics. But deep down, Neil knew he wasn't meant to stay behind the scenes. His voice, rich, soulful, unmistakable, demanded to be heard. His first big break came with Solitary Man, a song that mirrored his own life, a young man searching for meaning in a world that often felt cold. The song didn't just introduce Neil Diamond. It defined him. There was no glamour in it, just truth, the kind of truth that people connected with instantly. Then came a string of hits that would make him a global sensation. Cherry, Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon, and the anthem that would echo through stadiums for decades, Sweet Caroline. That song, written in a moment of pure inspiration, would go on to unite millions. From ballparks to wedding halls, its simple chorus became a universal celebration of joy and togetherness. By the 1970s, Neil Diamond was one of the biggest stars in the world. His concerts sold out arenas, his albums topped charts, and his sequined shirts became iconic. But behind that glittering image was still the same thoughtful man from Brooklyn. Private, introspective, and deeply emotional. While fans saw a confident performer, Neil often felt the weight of loneliness that fame brings. His songs reflected that inner world, part triumph, part melancholy. In interviews, he rarely spoke about fame. Instead, he talked about writing. "I don't write songs," he once said. "I uncover them. They're already there, I just find them." That humility, that quiet truth, made his music timeless. But as the years went on, the pressure of touring, recording, and living under the public eye began to take its toll. Behind the applause was exhaustion, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Still, Neil never stopped performing. The stage was his sanctuary, and as long as he could stand before a crowd, he would give them everything he had, little. Did anyone know that the same stage that had defined his life would soon be the place where it all began to unravel? The man who once sang with boundless energy was about to face a challenge no melody could fix, a test that would silence the music, at least for a while. For decades, Neil Diamond seemed unstoppable. His voice, deep and commanding, filled stadiums with energy and emotion. Fans described his concerts as spiritual experiences, nights where the world felt brighter, lighter, alive. But in 2018, during what was supposed to be just another tour, everything changed. Neil began noticing something strange. His hands trembled. His movement slowed. The stage that had once felt like home began to feel uncertain beneath his feet. At first he thought it was fatigue, the natural wear of years spent performing. But soon, the symptoms grew harder to ignore. Doctors ran tests. And then, the truth came. Neil Diamond was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a progressive neurological disorder that affects movement, balance, and muscle control. For most people, it's life-altering. For a performer whose life revolved around rhythm, it was devastating. The news hit him like a wave. Suddenly, the man whose energy defined generations had to confront a future where even holding a microphone might become impossible. After more than 50 years on stage, Neil made the hardest decision of his life: to stop touring. In January 2018, he announced his retirement from live performances. His statement was brief, but heavy with emotion. "It is with great reluctance and disappointment that I announce my retirement from concert touring. I've been so honored to bring my shows to the public for the past 50 years. Fans around the world were heartbroken. For millions, Neil Diamond wasn't just a musician, he was a memory, a voice that carried them through decades of life. His retirement felt personal, like saying goodbye to an old friend." Behind the scenes, Neil faced his diagnosis with the same quiet strength that had always defined him. There was no self-pity, no dramatic farewell, just grace. He began focusing on his health, spending time with his family, and rediscovering peace away from the constant motion of fame. But letting go of the stage wasn't easy. In interviews, he admitted that the hardest part wasn't the disease, it was the silence. "When the lights go out," he said, "you start to hear things you've ignored for years." Those words carried the pain of a man who had lived his entire life through music. Yet, even as Parkinson's tried to slow him, Neil refused to let it define him. He continued to write and record when he could, finding new meaning in smaller moments, in family dinners, quiet mornings, and the simple act of being alive. He often visited his old recordings, listening not to the perfection of the performance but to the emotion behind them. "I can still sing," he said. "I just can't tour. The music hasn't left me." For his fans, that promise meant everything. It reminded them that while the man may have stepped away from the stage, his legacy would never fade. And then something extraordinary happened. In 2020, during the height of global uncertainty, Neil appeared online, strumming his guitar and singing a reworked version of Sweet Caroline, changing the lyrics to bring hope. It was a small gesture, but it lit up the world. It proved that even in illness, Neil's heart still beat through the music. When the applause faded and the crowds went home, Neil Diamond entered a new chapter of his life, one not defined by fame, but by peace. For the first time in over half a century, there were no lights, no rehearsals, no tour buses waiting outside. Only silence. And for Neil, that silence was both terrifying and freeing. At 84, he now wakes up to a world that moves slower, but more meaningfully. The man who once lived for the stage has learned to live for the simple things. He spends his mornings surrounded by nature, his afternoons in quiet reflection, and his evenings with the woman who never left his side, his wife, Katie. After decades of constant travel and performance, Neil began to realize that the truest version of himself wasn't found under the spotlight. It was found in the stillness. In an interview, he once said softly, "For years I was chasing something. Perfection, applause, recognition. But now I'm just learning how to be." That's the beauty of Neil Diamond's story. It's not a tragedy of loss, it's a story of rediscovery. Though Parkinson's disease changed his life, it did not take his light. If anything, it made it shine in new ways. His passion for songwriting remains untouched. He still sits with his guitar, strumming out melodies that speak of time, love, and memory. The words come slower now, but they come from a deeper place, from a man who has lived, lost, and learned. "Every song I write now," he shared, "is a letter to life itself." Friends say Neil has found peace in reflection. He's no longer chasing the next big performance or album. Instead, he focuses on gratitude for the music, the fans, and the life he's lived. He often revisits his old performances, not with sadness, but with pride. Those songs, he says, were chapters in his life, and now he's simply turning the page. Despite his health challenges, Neil made a surprise appearance in 2023 at the opening of A Beautiful Noise, the Broadway musical based on his life and songs. The crowd erupted the moment he stepped on stage. Then something magical happened. Neil began to sing Sweet Caroline. The same voice that had once filled arenas echoed once more, gentle but strong. The audience sang with him, every word, every note, and for that moment, time stood still. It wasn't just a performance. It was a reminder that even when the body weakens, the soul never does. That night, Neil Diamond wasn't a star reliving his past. He was a man celebrating everything he had given to the world. Since then, Neil has embraced life's slower rhythm. He spends time writing poetry, listening to classical music, and sharing quiet laughter with his grandchildren. Those who know him say he's content, truly content, in a way he never was during the peak of his fame. Through his struggle, Neil Diamond has taught the world a profound truth. Greatness isn't measured by how long you stand in the spotlight, but by the light you leave behind when you step away. And Neil's light, that deep, golden voice, that sincerity in every lyric, continues to glow in every heart that's ever sung along to Sweet Caroline, I Am. I said, or hello again. He once said, when all is said and done, I just hope my songs remind people they're not alone. And perhaps that's the real legacy of Neil Diamond, a man who gave the world more than music. He gave it comfort. He gave it truth. He gave it heart. As Neil Diamond looks back on more than 8 decades of life, his story feels less like a career and more like a symphony, one composed of passion, struggle, love, and redemption. Few artists have ever bridged the gap between fame and feeling as gracefully as he did, because Neil was never just a performer. He was a storyteller who sang from the soul. From his earliest days in Brooklyn to the grandest stages of the world, Neil's journey has always been about connection. His songs carried the essence of human experience, joy and sorrow, heartbreak and hope, loneliness and belonging. Whether it was Cracklin' Rosie lifting spirits or I said, echoing the ache of self-reflection, Neil Diamond gave listeners something rare, honesty. His, bold, yet vulnerable, became a mirror for millions who heard their own emotions in his lyrics. In every song there was a piece of him, and that's why, even after his retirement, his music hasn't faded. It's only grown deeper with time. Neil's influence can be heard in generations of artists who followed. From pop to country to rock, countless musicians cite him as a master of melody and meaning. But ask Neil himself, and he'd never call it influence. He'd call it gratitude. Gratitude for being allowed to share his truth. Gratitude for the fans who listened, and gratitude for the gift of music itself. Even as Parkinson's changed his life, Neil never stopped being grateful. I still have my voice, he once said quietly. Maybe not the same as before, but it's mine. And that's enough. Those simple words capture his essence, humble, grounded, and profoundly human. Today, Neil Diamond lives a life of quiet reflection, far from the flashing cameras and roaring crowds, but his presence is everywhere. His songs still play at weddings, stadiums, and family gatherings. His lyrics are quoted in love letters and written into the memories of millions. Every time someone sings Sweet Caroline at the top of their lungs, they're keeping a little part of Neil's spirit alive. In 2022, when he made that surprise appearance at Fenway Park, home of Sweet Caroline's most famous tradition, fans wept. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was reverence. They weren't cheering for a celebrity. They were thanking a man who had given them the soundtrack to their lives, and maybe that's Neil Diamond's greatest legacy. Not the awards, not the records sold, but the way his music continues to unite people. From Boston to London, from New York to Sydney, his songs have crossed borders, generations, and cultures. They remind us of something timeless, that music, when it's honest, can heal. As he grows older, Neil remains content in the background, watching as others carry his songs forward. Broadway's A Beautiful Noise ensures that his story will echo for generations. But for those who grew up with his voice, Neil doesn't need a stage anymore. His place is already eternal, in the quiet spaces of memory and melody. When asked how he wants to be remembered, Neil's answer was simple. I just hope people remember that I tried to make something beautiful. That's all I ever wanted. And he did. From Solitary Man to Sweet Caroline, from heartache to healing, Neil Diamond's life is proof that even when the music slows, the song never truly ends. Because true artistry isn't about how loud you can sing. It's about how deeply your song is felt after the last note fades. And for Neil Diamond, that song still plays on.